In 1948, Union Pacific faced a crisis no ordinary engine could solve. A freight surge was so severe that even their mighty big boys were too expensive. Diesel lash-ups stalled on Wyoming's Sherman Hill. The board demanded a locomotive with the power of a land battleship. What they got was a jet turbine so loud it shook houses, and so strong it shattered every freight record ever set. But if this machine was truly the future, why did it vanish almost overnight? To understand, you have to see just how desperate the mission became before anyone dared to build the world's loudest train. Sherman Hill was a railroad's nightmare dressed as 7 miles of Wyoming granite. Between Cheyenne and Beaufort, the track clawed its way up a 1.55% westbound grade, a number that does not sound like much until you are the one trying to drag 5,000 tons of freight behind you. This was no gentle slope. For decades, it was the single steepest stretch on Union Pacific's main line, a place where steam engines burned through coal and men alike just to keep trains moving. By 1948, the war was over, but the battle with the hill was just beginning. The post-war boom sent freight volumes surging by 50% in a single year. Every day, dispatchers watched the yards fill with boxcars, tankers, and hoppers, all waiting for their turn to grind up the grade. The big boy steamers could muscle their way over, but at a punishing cost: mountains of coal, endless maintenance, and crews working around the clock. Diesel power was supposed to be the future, but on Sherman Hill, the reality was a logistical headache. A single EMDF-3 diesel made just 1,500 horsepower. To move a heavy westbound train, the railroad had to lash 4, 5, sometimes even 6 units together. That meant 6 engines to fuel, 6 sets of wheels to check, and 6 chances for something to go wrong. If one unit stalled or lost power, the whole train could be stranded halfway up the climb. Delays stacked up. Dispatchers shuffled schedules and prayed for clear tracks, but the bottleneck never let up. Operating staff called it a squeeze. The railroad needed more trains, but the hill set a hard limit. The horsepower gap was real and growing. Union Pacific faced a choice: keep stringing together weak engines, or find a single machine with enough muscle to break the hill's grip for good. Union Pacific's boardroom in 1948 was not a place for half measures. The numbers on the ledger were brutal. Running a single big boy steam locomotive over Sherman Hill cost more than $500,000 a year in coal, water, and labor. Crews worked in shifts just to keep the giants moving, while maintenance yards overflowed with worn-out parts. The new diesels promised savings, but the reality was even more expensive. Every heavy train needed a parade of engines and crews, and every breakdown multiplied the cost. The railroad's top brass, led by Otto Kuhler and President William Jeffers, faced a choice. They could keep patching together fleets of underpowered diesels, or they could leap into the unknown. The board's directive was blunt: stop thinking small. Find a single locomotive with enough muscle to climb Sherman Hill alone, a machine with the power of an entire fleet. Meeting minutes from that year captured the urgency. Freight was piling up, and every delay threatened Union Pacific's reputation. The pressure for a solution was intense. As one executive put it, they needed a battleship on rails, not a flotilla of rowboats. The financial gap was impossible to ignore. Steam engines drained the budget, but stringing together 5 or 6 diesels was not much better. The real breakthrough would come from something radical: a locomotive that could replace 5 diesels, run longer between overhauls, and crush the bottleneck once and for all. In 1948, Union Pacific's mandate was clear: build the most powerful locomotive the world had ever seen, whatever it took. Vincent Mertz, a General Electric engineer, stared at a jet engine and saw more than flight. He saw the answer to a railroad's nightmare. While most of the industry dismissed turbines as impractical for the rails, Mertz and his team were thinking in revolutions per minute, not tradition. The question was simple: if a turbine could hurl a fighter jet through the sky, why couldn't it haul a freight train over the Rockies? Aviation had already proven the raw power of turbines. In the skies above Korea, the F-86 Sabre and MiG-15 were rewriting the rules of speed and force. The secret was in the cycle. Air rushed into the compressor, was squeezed tight, mixed with fuel, and then ignited in a controlled explosion. The force spun a turbine wheel at speeds up to 6,900 RPM, so fast that engineers had to invent new alloys just to keep the blades from flying apart. The exhaust, screaming out at 800 degrees Fahrenheit, was hot enough to blister paint and warp steel. But the magic wasn't just in the heat or the speed, it was in the simplicity. A turbine had a fraction of the moving parts of a diesel. No pistons slamming back and forth, no crankshafts twisting under stress. Just pure, continuous rotation. For every revolution, the turbine delivered smooth, relentless power. Mertz's notes from the late 1940s put it bluntly: aviation power, derated for rails, equals 10 times the horsepower per pound. The challenge was translating that airborne energy to steel rails. Aircraft turbines were designed for high-speed flight at 30,000 feet, not for crawling up a mountain with a mile-long train in tow. Turbines thrived on steady, high loads. They did not like to idle or throttle back. Yet, the numbers were impossible to ignore. A single gas turbine could deliver 8,500 horsepower, more than 5 times what a standard diesel could muster. The potential to replace a whole string of diesels with one machine was enough to make even the most skeptical railroad executive pause. Skeptics in the industry pointed to every reason the idea should fail. Turbines spun so fast that any flaw could lead to catastrophic failure. The exhaust was so hot, it threatened to scorch tunnels and bridges. And the sound, engineers joked, was like standing behind a jet at takeoff, only louder. But Merz was undeterred. He believed that with the right engineering, the turbine's brute force could be tamed for the rails. General Electric's early testbeds in Schenectady became a proving ground. Engineers ran turbines at full tilt, measuring vibrations, testing alloys, and calculating just how much air and fuel could be crammed through the system before something gave way. They designed intake screens to protect against birds and debris, and built heavy-duty generators to turn all that spinning energy into electricity for the traction motors. Every test pushed the limits, but each success brought the concept closer to reality. Union Pacific's leadership watched with growing interest. The old solutions, lash-ups of diesels, armies of steam crews, were running out of road. The turbine offered a clean slate. It was a gamble, but the stakes were clear. Solve Sherman Hill and the railroad could move more freight, faster, and at a lower cost. Mertz's vision, born in the jet age, was about to meet the granite of Wyoming head-on. The leap from sky to rail was no longer a fantasy, it was a blueprint ready to be built. In 1958, Union Pacific took delivery of a machine that looked less like a locomotive and more like a rolling industrial experiment. The railroad called it the Big Blow. It was built in 3 distinct units, stretching nearly 200 feet from nose to tail. Up front sat the cab, a fortress of steel and glass where the crew rode high above the rails. Behind it sat the turbine car, a massive steel box housing the heart of the beast, a gas turbine engine that spun at 6,900 revolutions per minute. At the very end was a fuel tender that resembled a small oil tank on wheels, its walls lined with heating coils and insulation. Union Pacific's procurement team had demanded one thing: power delivered without compromise. General Electric answered with a turbine that could produce 8,500 horsepower, dwarfing the output of any diesel locomotive on the market. The Big Blow did not just outmuscle its rivals, it rewrote the rules of what a locomotive could be. The turbine car alone weighed over 200 tons fully fueled. The generator inside was so large it had to be craned into place at the factory. When the turbine fired up, the sound was closer to a jet engine than a train, a high-pitched whine that could be heard for miles. But the real genius was not just in the horsepower, it was in the fuel. Instead of burning expensive diesel, the Big Blow ran on bunker C, a thick tar-like residue left over from the bottom of the oil barrel. In the 1950s, Bunker C was so cheap that refineries practically gave it away. Most railroads would not touch it. It was too dirty, too viscous, and too much trouble. But Union Pacific saw an opportunity. The tender was designed with electric heating coils that kept the fuel at 250 degrees Fahrenheit, just hot enough to turn sludge into liquid. From there, it was pumped into the turbine's combustion chamber, atomized, and ignited in a roar of blue flame. This was an economic hack on an industrial scale. At just 3 cents a gallon, Bunker C cost a fraction of what diesel did. The Big Blow could run for hundreds of miles between stops, burning a fuel that nobody else wanted. The tender had a 24,000-gallon capacity, which meant fewer refueling breaks and more time spent hauling freight. Every detail was engineered for endurance and efficiency. The turbine itself had only a handful of moving parts compared to the thousands inside a diesel engine. Fewer moving parts meant fewer breakdowns and less time in the shop. Inside the cab, engineers faced a control panel unlike anything they had seen before. Instead of throttling up a diesel, they managed a jet engine, monitoring temperatures, fuel flow, and turbine speed. The startup sequence was a ritual. Prime the lines, heat the fuel, bring the turbine to idle, then unleash 8,500 horsepower with a twist of the throttle. The payoff was immediate. A single Big Blow could move 100 loaded boxcars up Sherman Hill at speeds that left traditional engines gasping in its wake. Union Pacific's decision to gamble on this design was driven by cold arithmetic and plain economics. Every mile the Big Blow ran on cheap fuel saved money. Every train it pulled without the need for helper engines or multiple diesels cut labor and maintenance costs. By 1958, the railroad had a machine that could do the work of 5 diesels at a fraction of the fuel price. The Big Blow was not just a new locomotive, it was a statement of intent. For a brief moment, Union Pacific had turned the railroad's biggest headache into a showcase of American engineering audacity. The first time a Big Blow left the yard at full throttle, every head in Cheyenne turned. The sound alone was enough to rattle windows and set dogs barking for miles. For the crews at the controls, it was something else entirely. Engineer Bill Price remembered the turbine's scream as like 10 747s spooling up at once, a vibration so strong it made the cab shake and his teeth buzz. Fireman Ray Delacote joked that the air intake could have sucked the hat right off his head if he got too close. But when the throttle opened and the train started to move, all anyone could do was hang on. Sherman Hill, where steam giants had crawled and diesels stalled, the Big Blow took the grade like it was nothing. One engine, 3 units long, pulling 100 loaded boxcars up a 1.55% grade at 40 miles an hour. The numbers were staggering. Each turbine averaged more than 100,000 miles every year, running almost non-stop from Council Bluffs to Ogden and back. Even though they made up less than 2% of Union Pacific's locomotive fleet, these machines hauled more than 10% of all the railroad's freight. That's not a typo. 1 out of every 10 tons crossing the Rockies rode behind a turbine. The power was so overwhelming that it sometimes outmatched the hardware it was supposed to protect. There is a story from 1960. A Big Blow, loaded with 100 cars, started up Sherman Hill a little too aggressively. The coupler on the first car snapped with a bang, sending the rest of the train rolling backward down the grade. It was not a fluke. If the engineer got careless with the throttle, the turbine could literally snap steel couplers in half. The rules had to be rewritten for this kind of force. Crews described the experience as both terrifying and addictive. The cab vibrated non-stop. The heat from the turbine could blister paint 50 feet away, and the noise was so intense that men wore earplugs just to get through a shift. But when the train reached the summit at speed, with no helpers and no delays, it felt like victory. For 2 decades, the Big Blow did not just meet the challenge of Sherman Hill, it crushed it. The critics who called it a monster had to admit the monster could move mountains. The reign of the Big Blow was always balanced on a razor's edge. For all its brute force, the turbine had a weakness that no amount of engineering could hide. The moment it dropped below full throttle, the numbers turned against it. Unlike a diesel, which could idle quietly and sip fuel, the turbine guzzled Bunker C at nearly the same rate standing still as when hauling 100 cars up Sherman Hill. Crews dreaded long waits at red signals or sidings, every wasted minute meaning gallons of fuel burned and dollars evaporating into the Wyoming wind. Union Pacific's accountants watched the fuel bills climb. When the first turbines rolled out, Bunker C was refinery trash, thick, black, and nearly worthless. At 3 cents a gallon, it was the loophole that made the entire experiment possible. But by the mid-1960s, the world changed. Chemists found ways to crack heavy oil into plastics, unleashing a new gold rush in the petrochemical industry. Suddenly, the stuff nobody wanted became the feedstock for everything from toys to car parts. The price of Bunker C did not just creep up, it soared. By 1969, it cost almost as much as diesel, erasing the one advantage that had kept the turbines in the black. The boardroom debates grew sharper. Internal memos from 1967 and 1968 spelled out the hard truth: turbine fuel costs had doubled in less than a decade. What once saved Union Pacific a fortune now threatened to bankrupt their most ambitious fleet. Economists inside the company ran the numbers and found the break-even point had vanished. With maintenance and fuel combined, each turbine cost nearly twice as much per mile as a modern diesel consist. The railroad's president, John Kennefick, put it bluntly: keep the turbines running and the railroad would bleed cash. Noise complaints only added to the pressure. The turbine's scream, once a badge of power, became a liability. As suburbs spread along the tracks. In towns like Rawlins and Cheyenne, residents packed council meetings with stories of sleepless nights and cracked windows. There were no formal bans written into law, but the message was clear: keep the monsters away from town or face a political fight. Union Pacific quietly began parking turbines in remote sidings, idling them far from city limits, but that only made their inefficiency worse. By 1970, the verdict was inescapable. The turbines were withdrawn from service, their hulking frames parked in the dead lines. Most were cut up for scrap by 1979. Their engines silenced before the first oil crisis could even rewrite the rules. For all their power, the big blows were outmaneuvered by the very forces that had once made them possible. Economics, public pressure, and the relentless progress of technology had closed the book on America's loudest locomotive. Today, railroads chase efficiency and silence, yet the need for raw disruptive power never disappears. As global shipping demands surge and energy sources shift, the question returns: will we dare to build machines that challenge limits even when they do not fit polite expectations? Progress is not always quiet. Sometimes it shakes the ground. Let me know what you think. Could a new turbine ever roar again?